Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started. This is part 2 of What If Ichigo Lost His Zanpakuto in the World of One Piece. Chapter 4. The Calm. A rush of wind grazed past Ichigo's right ear. He nimbly dodged the dark katana that came his way and responded with his own strike, which was equally matched with a block. In turn, Zoro forced him further back, before striking in a wave of inhuman strength. Is this guy really only human? Ichigo grit his teeth as he summoned the paramount of his strength, using both hands on his single katana whilst blocking the two Zoro held in either hand. Well, at least I'm in my Shinigami form, or I wouldn't stand a chance. Not even with sharp reflexes. Simultaneously, the two burst free from one another, rebounding of one another's strength. They exchanged a glance before running at each other, both intent on becoming the victor. Ichigo jumped in with a clanging clash of steel on steel. Their swords met in a flurry of untraceable blows. They broke their offense, both being thrown back slightly by the destructive force. Not letting a moment of the sparring match go to waste, Ichigo swiftly leapt towards Zoro in a burst of shunpo. Zoro almost didn't have time to register the inhuman speed of the substitute Shinigami, but parried the sudden onslaught with his own equally destructive blows. Their eyes met in unison with a clashing of their swords and a communal scowl. The vibrant exchange lasted minutes, before they parted once again, this time for a brief unspoken but agreed break in the onslaught, of which neither were willing to verbally suggest. How does he do it? Ichigo wondered as he took the time to marvel at his opponent's specialized swordsmanship. Three-sword style, it looks difficult. Though even in my Shinigami form, this guy has far more brute strength. At least I still have speed on my side. Ichigo pondered the young man's lengthy scar, which grazed over his ever-shut left eye. And it looks like he's half blind. This guy relies on more than just good reflexes. Zoro silently observed the younger male, having taken into account his technique and style of fighting. Well, he's got one sword style sorted out. Zoro acknowledged the other's proficiency in what was his own less capable sword style. And damn, he's fast like the cook, and his agility's better than mine. He could be a useful ally or formidable opponent. But I still don't know what to make of him. Zoro exchanged a glance with his opponent, before they both rose from their temporary breather and engaged in a series of blows once more. The stalemate lasted several minutes. Eventually, Zoro decided the mindless exchange of blows and blocks had gone on long enough and took his opponent by surprise by evading a strong swipe, approaching Ichigo from the side, crouching and effortlessly disarming him with a swipe of Shisui. It would have seemed like a complete victory, had Shisui not also gone flying along with the katana he'd lent Ichigo in the process, courtesy of Ichigo quickly pulling a similar disarming blow. However, Zoro's use of Santoryu left him the clear victor, as he remained armed with two of his three katanas. The green-haired swordsman stood, bringing himself to his full height, a few inches taller than his single-sworded rival, whom was panting heavily. You're not bad, he admitted, there aren't too many who can match me. But why don't you go full out? You're interesting, but I'm not sure if it's a good or bad thing. I want to see what you can do. You're quite good yourself, Ichigo acknowledged, stronger than several Shinigami, Hollows and Arankar I've met at least. Zoro listened in mild curiosity. Obviously, knowing Ichigo, he knew what a Shinigami was. He'd heard him mention hollows as well, but a Rancor? Meh, I'll ask him about it later. But you don't want to see me go full out, Ichigo continued, trust me. Is that so? Zoro questioned, whilst adjusting the red sash around his deep green coat so to sheath his katanas. Well, in case you haven't noticed, you haven't gone full out either, Ichigo pointed out. If I did, the ship would be in danger. Likewise. He's probably right. Had we both gone full out, disarming each other wouldn't be as easy, Zoro thought, before speaking, then we'd better not go full out while on the ship. Frankie would hunt us down, and you know how he gets. Ichigo nodded. Besides, he said, on the ship or off the ship, if you want to see just how far I can go within reason, I'd need Zangetsu. It's not as easy to fight without him. That's why I'm traveling with you lot in the first place. Oh, right. I forgot, Zoro said dumbly. There was an awkward pause as Ichigo stared out into space. Wondering what could be capturing the attention of the orange-haired teen, Zoro followed his gaze but found nothing aside from the expanse of water before them. So he returned his gaze to Ichigo, frowning slightly. It didn't take Ichigo long to realize he was being watched, and he reverted his gaze to the green-haired man before him. There was further awkward silence as the two simply stared at each other, unblinking. After a few moments, Zoro tilted his head to the side. What? Quote. What? Single quote question mark. Quote. You were spacing out and have a stupid look on your face. Huh. Well, you're the one who started staring first. Quote. Only because you were brainlessly staring out at the horizon. I was thinking. Ichigo retorted. You can do that? Zoro asked, sounding surprised. Shut up. You, with your name like that Mexican swordsman and inhumane brute strength, Ichigo suddenly came to a startling realization. Are you related to Chad? Quote. Zoro raised an eyebrow. Chad. I don't know anyone with that name. I think you need your head checked. And what's a Mexican? He thought to himself. What Ichigo may have said next was interrupted by a shout from a distinguishable voice on the upper deck. Zoro. Moon guy. Quote. Zoro and Ichigo paused their staring contest momentarily to acknowledge the captain, whom was sitting cross-legged on the rail, spectating their scuffle. What is it, Luffy? Zoro asked. Luffy pointed to the front of the ship. We've docked. Both Ichigo and Zoro followed the direction the captain was pointing. Sure enough, they were docked in a small port of a decent-sized town. Furthermore, the rest of the crew were nowhere in sight. Huh. Where'd everyone else go? Ichigo asked dumbly, blinking as though everyone would suddenly show up again. Oh, they went into the town about an hour ago. You two didn't notice because you were too busy fighting. Sparring, Zoro corrected. Luffy didn't seem to notice. Sanji's now in the kitchen, he's come back from getting carrots and he's making dinner. Usopp is waiting at the dock. We decided we'd wait for you two to finish your fighting, but we got bored and went into the town. Then we came back to see if you guys had noticed we'd docked or not, but you hadn't. But when Sanji kicked me out of the kitchen I got bored. I wanna go back to the town. But Ichigo and Zoro had stopped listening. I can't believe they didn't even tell us we'd arrived. Zoro grumbled, agitated. I can't believe we've been docked for over an hour and no one told us. Ichigo complained. Well, maybe if your hair wasn't such a ridiculous color I wouldn't have been so distracted and could have noticed. You're the one with the ridiculous hair color. Quote, Marimo. Sanji's voice chorused down from the kitchen and joined the verbal dispute. You wanna fight, cook? Zoro shouted up towards the galley. You and Ichigo are done then. Finally. I thought you two would never notice we'd arrived. We would if you'd told us. Ichigo shouted up at the cook. I didn't think I'd need to tell you. But now we know. From now on, I'll make sure you two know when we dock at an island or go to the town. It's a nice town too, by the way. Many lovely ladies. I might even go back in soon. You've just been in. Zoro pointed out. Well then, said Sanji, just keep up what you've been doing for the last hour and a half and you won't even notice I'm gone. This time I think I might get some seaweed sticks and orange juice. Zoro and Ichigo, missing the joke altogether, resorted to welcoming Sanji into their now three-way argument. Well, maybe we'd go into the town too. Ichigo stated, then we might not be here when you get back. Or you could just be hiding, Sanji pointed out. As if we'd hide. Quote, you'd both camouflage nicely in Nami-san's mikan trees, though on behalf of Nami-san I will not let you touch them. What are you implying, dartboard head? Zoro questioned. Sanji laughed. What does it sound like I'm implying, Seamus? Quote, I blame you for that. Zoro glowered at Ichigo, cursing the idiot's lack of talent in recalling names. Ha ha ha, Luffy laughed at the three's exchange, you guys are real idiots. Quote, we don't want to hear that from you. Quote, as the swordsman and cook engaged in argument, Luffy took the opportunity to whisk Ichigo over to the docks, where Usopp was waiting. What took you so long? The sniper complained, disregarding the unnaturally large grin on his captain's face. Moon Guy was arguing with Zoro and Sanji, ha ha ha. Quote, ah great, don't tell me he's going to be joining those guys' usual dumb fights, Usopp muttered, envisioning the three engaged in an idiotic scramble, just Zoro and Sanji on their own is enough. Quote, Luffy ignored his friend's remarks in favor of another trip into town, let's give Moon Guy a tour. Ah, yes. He didn't get to see it because he and Zoro were too busy fighting. We were sparring, Ichigo corrected, but neither of the two seemed to care as they approached him from either side, each slinging an arm over a shoulder. Ichigo gulped. What was he in for with these two involved? We'll show him what he missed. Luffy announced, let's go, Usopp. We'll show him all the best spots in town. Quote, Yosh. Usopp affirmed and the captain and the sniper merrily began escorting their captive towards the island's thriving town. Wait. Ichigo urged them as he was dragged along, how can you show me all the best spots when you've only shortly been into the town once? Quote, Luffy stopped walking abruptly without warning, causing Usopp to take a few extra paces before stopping and resulting in Ichigo standing awkwardly lopsided between the two of them. Luffy proceeded to chuckle at Ichigo's comment as though he'd just said something incredibly childish. You hear him, Usopp? How can you show me all the best spots when you've only been into the town once? Children can be so rash and inexperienced. So rash, indeed. Usopp said in agreement, his tone mimicking Luffy's, and so naive. We'll show him though. It's about time Ichigo became a man. Quote, remembering the two were actually 2 years his senior, old enough to be elder brothers to him, Ichigo gulped and spent the remainder of his boisterous shepherd toward the town in silent mourning for the future of the pirate world. The town was humble yet thriving, and Ichigo had never seen anything quite like it. The sinking island from before had not been a good mark for his judgment. It was unoccupied and therefore had no firm man-made structure for Ichigo to compare to the likes of what he was used to back in Japan. He quickly learned that the island was named Munkeln and the town was known as Umschlagstadt. It had a large port and bay and seemed to find firm footing in the fishing business. The architecture of the buildings was foreign to Ichigo, yet he'd seen similar structures in schoolbooks and pictures of places in European countries. The entire atmosphere of the town gave him the feeling he'd stepped back in time a century compared to what he was used to, though with a slightly alternate universe spin. There were people who wore in shops that sold modern enough-looking clothing, and strange devices of technology such as portable phone snails similar to what he'd seen in the dining area of the ship. Another thing he noticed about a variety of the people was that they'd look less out of place in the Soul Society than in the world of the living. It seemed that in this world, a much larger array of hair colors were considered natural. At first, Ichigo had considered Zoro's green and Frankie's blue, among other things, to be odd-on, highly debatably, normal humans in a world that wasn't the Soul Society or Hueco Mundo. However, as Ichigo, Luffy and Usopp wandered along the main road, it was not uncommon to see people sporting these colors as well as mixtures of pinks, purples, reds and whites among the usual blacks, browns, gingers and blondes. I'd have no trouble convincing people that this is my natural color here, Ichigo thought to himself. If only home was more like this, it could have saved me lots of trouble. Kurisaki's been bleaching his hair since birth. PFF'd, what a joke. Also Ichigo noticed, on average, many people were taller here. Whilst some may have been roughly the small to average height of people back at home, such as the two idiots whom were currently guiding him, they were among the shorter ones. Ichigo felt relatively puny as they passed one man to whom he barely reached an elbow, and a girl who appeared to be around his age, yet easily stood a head taller. It seemed that Frankie, Heavy Point Chopper and even Brooks' towering builds were nothing out of the ordinary, and every so often they'd pass someone even taller than that again. The only beings Ichigo had seen this tall elsewhere were certain Arankar and a few Shinigami. We've reached it, Luffy declared after a few minutes of wandering through the marketplace. Reached what? Ichigo questioned, looking around. The sun was setting and the markets were beginning to pack up. The food markets. Quote. But they're packing up, Ichigo noted. Luffy took a better look around and noticed the stall keepers packing their goods into wagons and retiring to their homes for the day. Yosh. Luffy said, as though he'd just realized, they're packing up. We'll come back tomorrow. Instead of heading back to the ship, Ichigo followed as the two led him on through the town, all the while taking in the various sights, sounds and smells. Luffy and Usopp were excitedly telling him of various street shows and people they'd seen earlier. And this Asen here, Luffy indicated to a middle-aged man who was snoozing loudly, he keeps sleeping. I bet he'd get along with Zoro. But I wonder if he's dead. He's snoring, Usopp pointed out. Oh. Good point. You're so smart, Usopp. They continued for about 20 minutes longer, before Luffy decided he was hungry and that Sanji would probably have dinner ready soon. That bar seems lively, Ichigo noted on the way back, indicating to a tavern a short way away, which was full of lights and animate chatter. We went in there earlier, said Usopp, but Luffy got us kicked out. Why doesn't that surprise me? Ichigo questioned. I don't want to go back there anyway, Luffy pouted, the meat was yuck. You didn't get around to trying any of the meat, said Usopp. The closest you got was when you were gnawing on the plastic display meat. We then got kicked out for ruining the property. What? So it really was plastic? Luffy asked, amazed. Well, the display did say, plastic, do not eat. If they don't want you to eat it, they shouldn't have it out there in the first place, Luffy said as though it was the most logical thing. I think you're missing the point, said Ichigo. Well, I'm gonna go in and give them some advice, Luffy said, striding over to the tavern. Luffy, Usopp said as he looked through the window, I don't know if you should. There's some Marines in there having dinner. Ah, there's only 2 weak ones though, they might not even know us, said Luffy. I'll just go in and give the owner a good perspective. And with that, Luffy calmly strolled right into the tavern, Usopp at his side. There was a few minutes pause before Ichigo heard Luffy loudly ask, if we're not meant to eat animals, then why are they made of food? Quote. It seemed that in Luffy's advice giving to the owner, he'd gotten into an argument with a vegetarian. Ichigo facepalmed, thinking only of the dumb talk Luffy and Usopp had given him on the way. Who's the rash one? Quote. The next day, Ichigo headed into town with Nami. There's a marine base on the other side of the island, she had cautioned them all before leaving, so keep a low profile, everyone. We don't want the Marines sniffing us out before the log sets. They had mostly gone their separate ways for the day, mainly to gather supplies of their own necessity, or to enjoy the island before leaving port. The log has set, all without any drama, Nami said at around midday, looking pleased. Ah, good, said Ichigo. The two of them were in the marketplace, gathering a few supplies before departure. It was agreed that everyone was to meet back up at the ship in 15 minutes' time. As Nami admired a scarf in a nearby stall, Ichigo had a look at the variety of foods being sold at a grocery stall. In his fumbling, he discovered a plump loaf of bread. Out of curiosity, he located a yellow price tag on the packaging. It read 300 berry. He thought, just 300, the other day I guessed that Luffy's bounty must be equal to a loaf of bread, but how much was it again? It was a lot more than this. This bread must be very cheap. You're staring at that bread very persistently, Nami noted to his right. Is this bread really cheap? He asked, whilst prodding it, waving it right in front of her face and indicating to the 300 berry price label. 300 berry? Not really. If anything, it's a little on the pricey side. Oh, Ichigo frowned for a moment, trying to do the math in his head. What was Luffy's bounty then? 400, wasn't it? Well, that isn't all that much more than a loaf of bread, so I was close. However, his contentedness was short-lived. Wait, it was a bit more than that. What was it? 400 meters, 400 mil. 400 million. He suddenly remembered the figure Luffy had told him, as well as the one he had glanced on a bounty poster the day before. However, Ichigo did not mean for his sudden realization to be declared loudly enough to be shared with everyone within the marketplace's vicinity. Nami groaned as several pairs of eyes from a number of the market's shoppers and merchants quickly flew to her and Ichigo, before she turned to Ichigo and infuriatedly voiced her retaliation. What part of keeping a low profile don't you understand? Quote. By now, whomever hadn't looked over at Ichigo's outburst were forced to with Nami's explosive response, which was not only heard by everyone within the marketplace's vicinity, but also everyone within the town. This seemed to include those at the sturdy-looking marine outpost on the eastern bay. "Attention all marine personnel," a voice sounded from a series of large den mushi situated throughout the town. "A woman identified as cat burglar Nami of the Straw Hat Pirates has been sighted in the south wing of the markets near the eastern docks. She is with a man whom appears to be her brother." "Your brother is here?" Ichigo asked, blinking around stupidly. "I didn't know you had a." "I don't, you idiot. Obviously they think you're my brother." Quote. The voice from the den mushi continued, "Have them captured immediately and prioritize searching for any other Straw Hat crew members who may be within the area. Now look what you've done." Nami exasperatedly snapped, "Just when I thought we'd get by without interference." "You're the one who got their attention," Ichigo retaliated. "That doesn't matter. The Marines are coming." Quote. "We can quickly head back to the ship, can't we?" Quote. "Too late. We're already surrounded." Though to confirm her statement, the patter of hundreds of rubber-shoed feet announced the arrival of a platoon of Navy soldiers uniformed in white and blue. Each of them was armed with a sleek black rifle. Nami unfolded a long staff-like device from her jeans. "Well, what should I do?" Ichigo questioned, his empty arms open. "I'm unarmed." "Then stick with me," Nami responded, "or fight with your fists." "You can do that, right?" Quote. Ichigo nodded, "I suppose so, but what can we do against so many when they're all armed with guns?" Quote. Nami laughed, "I keep forgetting that you haven't been with us long at all." By now, a large group on Marines had encircled them. "Be careful." A man who seemed to be their leader cautioned, "We don't know where the other Straw Hats may be hiding. Luckily we've sent other divisions stronger than ours in search of them." "And you plan on capturing us?" Nami asked calmly. "Well, what do you think?" the leader questioned. Nami smirked and raised her staff. "I think it's about to storm. Thunderbolt tempo." Quote. Ichigo's eyes widened as a mini electric storm burst forth from a gathering of gray clouds, seemingly from out of nowhere, and smote the gathering of Marines. Amazed, he looked from the now vanishing storm clouds, to the staff, to Nami. "Did you just come?" she said as Ichigo ogled at what she'd just done. "We have to go and meet the others back at the ship, there's no time for us to waste." Meanwhile, with our most articulate navigator. "Damn it, which way is east?" muttered Zoro as he ran alongside a large building, having just heard the announcement from the den mushi. If those idiots hadn't gone and gotten themselves lost, then maybe they'd be easier to find. Unbeknownst to Zoro, a pair of young Marines were looking on at his struggle. I think that's Roronoa." Zoro, a small wide-eyed and brace-toothed boy of about 16, whispered across to his slightly elder accomplice. His accomplice, a tall lanky boy with a wave of purple hair and a pair of glasses tucked into his trouser pocket, frowned and gave a nod. "He certainly fits what reports on him have told us. That's the 14th time he's run around that building and I don't even think he realizes it. What should we do?" Quote. "I dunno. I think he's trying to find the docks where they said they found that Nami girl and her brother. Let's just wait and see what he does." After Zoro had circumnavigated the same building another 3 times, the 2 young Marines decided enough was enough. Stepping out of the shadows they were hiding in, the purple-haired boy cleared his throat to get the swordsman's attention. "The eastern docks are that way," he said, pointing east to where the docks and markets were within clear sight. Zoro looked over at the markets, before giving the 2 Marine boys a brief once-over. "Thanks," he muttered, and began going in the right direction. Don't mention it. The purple-haired boy shouted after him. There was silence as the two boys watched Roronoa jog towards the markets. Wait a moment, the purple-haired boy realized. We just gave directions so a wanted criminal. Yeah. Quote. You mean you just gave directions to the wanted criminal, the smaller boy corrected. But you should have stopped me. There was a pause. Arg. You're right. Yeah. Quote. We need to go after him or we'll be demoted for this. Quote. Yeah. Quote. Yeah. Then just shut up and try coming after me already. Roronoa's voice barely reached them as they continued to blurt reaction faces at each other's stupidity. Chapter 5. Legend of the Five Immortal Glades. The Marines. Luffy frowned childishly as announcements about he and his crew continued resounding on the Den Den Mushi sound system, no fair. We just got here. Quote. Moreover, they're targeting Nami and her brother, Usopp pointed out. I never knew Nami had a brother. Luffy said in alarm. They must be talking about Ichigo, Usopp deduced as they ran along. He's a bit of an idiot. He probably did something dumb. Do you think Nami sis can take on all those Marines at once? Frankie asked. Nami, Luffy frowned, she mustn't have kept a low profile. But she's strong and can take out all those guys. So let's go and see if there's any food we can grab. Quote. The three ran towards the main markets, not sure whom they might run into. Hey, it's Zoro. Quote. The swordsman was winding around the buildings, trying to make his way over to the marketplace. Ah, there you lot are, he acknowledged when he sighted them. Why'd you wander off? Quote. You're the one who wandered off, Usopp retaliated, before sudden hurried footsteps drew their attention to what lay before them. They prepared themselves for combat, but loosened their stances when Ichigo and Nami rounded the bend. Head back to the ship, Nami instructed as she jogged along, her lengthy copper hair bouncing behind her. However, Luffy was intent on the markets. Where are you going? Nami demanded him. Head back to the ship, the log is set and we're leaving. Just a little longer, Luffy bargained with her. I was just gonna go get more food with San. Where'd Sanji go? Quote. He looked around for the cook. However, something caught his attention. Wow, Moon Guy can stand in the sky. Quote. Ichigo stood a few meters above the ground and observed their surroundings. There's a whole group of them coming from back that way, he said, indicating in the direction they'd come. We have to go that way to return to Sunny, said Nami, frowning. Ichigo continued watching the advancing Marines, noting the hesitation inherent in most of them. Damn it, where are they? One of them could be heard. Why aren't we being given any more reports or orders from the Den Den Mushi? Quote. Looks like they can't find us. Ichigo shouted down to the gathered crew members. However, this seemed to attract the attention of more than just the Straw Hats. Hey! Look! From down on the ground, Usopp heard a not-so-far-off voice. Judging by the look that suddenly plastered the substitute Shinigami's face, he'd just been discovered. It's Nami's brother. Quote. Nami's brother, the voice of the group's leader observed, looks like he's skilled user of Geppo. After him, men. Quote. What are you doing, Ichigo? Usopp shouted up at him. Crap. Cursed Ichigo, I was watching them but then I forgot I wasn't invisible. Quote. It was now Usopp's turn to facepalm at the other's stupidity. Ichigo. Catch. Ichigo held out a hand and caught the katana he'd used to spar with Zoro. Zoro. Quote. Keep it on you, the swordsman cautioned him, this is the new world. You never know when you'll need it. Thanks. Ichigo called after him as he leapt down to take out the small advancing group of Marines whom were blocking their path. Yeah. Nami's in danger and so is her brother. Wait, I didn't know she had a brother. Gyaaaaa, he's in danger. Quote. Calm down, Chopper-kun, Brooke's soothing voice told the erratic reindeer. Our job is to mind Sunny. Nami-san and her brother will be fine, especially if the others are there with them. Besides, that announcement was made 10 minutes ago, and none have been made in a while. It would be best for us to wait and relax until they get back. As though on cue, Nami sprung up on deck and wordlessly began unfurling one of the ship's sails. Nami. Chopper questioned, you're not in danger. I'm so glad, Tilda. But we'll all be in danger if we don't leave soon and the Marines corner us with their ships, said Nami, you too. Rein in the anchor and ready the sails. We need to depart as soon as the others get back. Ichigo brandished the katana Zoro had given him, the blunt side of the blade at the ready as the swordsman had done. He was in no mood to kill humans who were simply doing their job. However, by now there were more than just a few Marine officers crowding the path back to the ship. Will we make it back in time? Ichigo asked. Leave this to me, Luffy said. Ichigo watched in curious anticipation as Luffy single-handedly stood before a large horde of Marines who were ambling over at a swift pace. However, Luffy's stance suggested nothing of preparation to attack. What's he doing? Ichigo observed the young captain from behind, straw hat firmly fitted on his head and yellow sash billowing slightly in the breeze. And then something happened Ichigo had not prepared for. An invisible shockwave seemed to tremor out from the idiot captain, sending the vast majority of scrambling Marines to the ground without any effort. Luffy turned back towards the direction of the ship and grinned, proud of his accomplishment. What the heck was that? Ichigo wondered in shocked amazement. 400 million berry is worth more than a loaf of bread, right? He voiced as Luffy stood beside him, preparing for the next onslaught. Luffy laughed before responding. I wouldn't know, I've never had that much before. Just a glance around the surrounding vicinity proved to Ichigo that the others were faring fine as well. He watched amazement as he sighted Robin use her abilities in combat, summoning limbs several times her size to swat away oncoming Marines as though they were flies, whilst immobilizing others with sets of regular-sized arms. Call for reinforcements. The voice of one of the Marines called, where are all those strong idiots anyway? The freaking Straw Hat crew is here. Quote. Ichigo looked on as a whole group of Marines were sent flying through the air by an incredibly powerful kick. Almost instantaneously, Sanji was hovering in the sky beside him. Ichigo observed the cook and the 5 or so meters that stood between him and the ground. How come you can fly? Quote. Sanji gave him a look, before calmly stating, it's a long story and now is not the time. However, no matter how calmly Sanji had composed his response, his eyes betrayed traces of unspeakable horror and traumatizing events. Ichigo made note to ask him about it another day. What did you do? Frankie asked him. Sanji shrugged as he carefully lit the cigarette he held in his mouth. They rely a lot on that Den Den Mushi system, you know. So much so that you wouldn't think that'd only use the one main circuit for all of them. Nice, bro. Quote. A loud voice suddenly pierced Ichigo's ears. "Hey Moon Guy! Watch out!" Quote. Ichigo looked and swiftly Flash stepped out of the way just as a shower of bullets pelted the air he'd just been standing in. At least they would have, had Luffy not dived in the way and redirected the oncoming bullets with his rubber abilities. "They're much more powerful than I thought. Just who the heck am I traveling with?" Ichigo thought as he and the others continued fighting, with no real trouble, their way back toward the ship. They were nearly there when gunfire announced they still had pursuers. "These ones must be tougher," noted Luffy, already on board the Sunny. "I didn't get them all with my haki." Without further prompting, Luffy, Sanji and Zoro readied themselves to combat the remainders. "Wait a moment," Ichigo said before anyone could make a move to eliminate. Turning to Zoro, he said, "You wanted to see me go full out. I still have my Shunpo, but without Zangetsu I can't pull off complete full-powered moves like you guys can. But this might still work, I'm not completely sure. Any case, I can't sit back and let you guys take all the fight." Zoro and Sanji looked on curiously as Ichigo made his next move. Summoning forth a controlled portion of Reiatsu and idle power, Ichigo let his hand swiftly skim over his face, bringing with it a layer of chalky white and red bone and a boost in strength, stamina and speed. "All right," he thought to himself, "I can still do this. Let's see how it goes without Zangetsu." It was strange to source his wizard power whilst not in Bankai, but his swiftness and strength increased dramatically nonetheless. Although it would have been no problem to finish off those remaining without it, Ichigo effectively took them out in half the time it may have taken otherwise, the dull thuds merging together as he struck each with the blunt side of his blade. With another swift movement, Ichigo leapt aboard the ship just as it began to set sail. The 12 seconds were up and the mask dissolved into nothing. "Show off," Zoro commented, though had to admit he was impressed with the other's speed and ability. "It worked," Ichigo said with a smile as the ship gained speed. "So you weren't sure it would work, but waited until you were in battle to try it out?" Nami questioned. Well, I wouldn't really call it a battle so much. That's not the point." Never mind. I'm used to people making rash decisions." "Children can be so rash," Luffy popped into the conversation repeating his line from the previous evening. "So rash indeed, Tilda," Usopp added. "Don't go acting like you two have the right to say that," Nami said, shaking her head at their antics as she quickly ascended the staircase to the upper deck. Luffy laughed before turning to Ichigo. "Did you see it, Moon Guy?" Luffy questioned, stars glowing brightly in his wide eyes. A guy with a mask came out. "He was so scary and cool," Chopper added, equally ecstatic. Ichigo could only think of his wizard form. "He wasn't a hero though," Luffy continued, "he didn't have a cape." Ichigo was about to say something, when Frankie took him aside, obviously amused. "Well, that was cool and all, bro, but you know, if you were looking to join the crew, the role of guy who disappears for a bit, puts on a mask, changes his voice and fools only the captain and doctor, has already been taken by one of us." Ichigo questioned. Nearby, Zoro and Sanji only chuckled at the cyborg's comment, whilst Usopp humorously murmured something and looked away. "We're lucky the log didn't take long to set," Nami said from the upper deck, her eyes lingering in the log pose for a moment. "Now quick. Towards starboard. It won't be long before those marines come after us on the water, and that will be annoying. Leave that to me." said Frankie as he took the ship's steering wheel, turning the boat towards the sun as it set in the horizon, the deep burnt orange reflecting a warm glow in the water. "Everyone hang on tight." Quote. Ichigo looked around as the rest of the crew made no hesitation in grabbing onto the mast, a door, a wall, or whatever happened to be closest, which, in Sanji's case, was Nami, but he unfortunately had to change to the leg of Brooke's piano when he was pushed away, as though whatever Frankie was about to do was something they'd all experienced before. "Hurry, Ichigo!" Chopper's voice sounded from behind him. Ichigo quickly turned and squatted beside the small reindeer, sharing a firm grip on the doorframe Chopper had attached himself to. "What's going to?" Ichigo began, only to be interrupted by a cry of, "Coup de burst!" Quote. With a massive explosion of air, the ship was blasted up through the sky at an alarming speed. Ichigo held on tight as rushing wind tossed haphazardly at his orange hair, unable to believe that the ship was actually flying. Once the initial blast was over with, the crew were free to stand and pace the ship as they so pleased. Ichigo paced the deck, admiring the view. "Too bad we left before the strong ones could arrive," Zoro commented. "How is that a bad thing?" Usopp demanded. "Those are the more time-consuming ones." "That's because it takes more than a single hit to take them down," said Zoro, "though I admit, there probably weren't all that many Marines who'd make an interesting fight on that island." "True. But what's your definition of an interesting fight?" Quote. As the two continued their conversation, which somehow shifted to something along the lines of, "Remember that time with the giraffe?" At an impressive speed, a slightly strange feeling took Ichigo by surprise and he quickly grabbed hold of a nearby post to steady himself of his impromptu wave of dizziness. "That doesn't normally happen. What was that about?" He wondered as the dizziness passed and he straightened up, dismissing it as nothing more than queasiness brought on by the flying. But you know, as generic Marines they were strong compared to most of the generic ones back in Paradise, Ichigo heard Usopp say as he resumed his activity of pacing the deck, "though still it's only a matter of time before we run into the stronger ones. And then it will be a real fight." Zoro grinned, looking down and admiring his katanas. "I think I know someone you'd get along with very well," Ichigo commented to him offhandedly, visualizing the 11th Division's crazy captain. "When you're all ready," Robin's voice sounded from the upper deck, "come down to the Aqua Bar. I have an interesting story to tell you." "Right." The crew agreed. Strolling to the ship's helm, Ichigo watched as the island of Munklung gradually shrunk into the distance, before the horizon devoured it completely. Blast. They've escaped. Quote. The two young Marines whom had recently given directions to Roronoa Zoro watched as the infamous ship of the Straw Hat Pirates soared through the air and off into the distance. "Down by the eastern docks is in shambles," said the purple-haired boy as he adjusted his glasses, "and the Den Den Mushi system has been done in." Quote. "Well, that part needed to happen," the shorter one admitted. "That wiring system had it for months. What the pirates did to it was the last step that was needed in order for the captains to admit we need a new one." "Yeah, you're right. Wait a moment, I just said that one of the things the pirates did was a good thing. And you agreed with me." "Yeah." Quote. "And we gave directions to Roronoa." "Yeah." Quote. "We'll be demoted." "Yeah." Quote. "Gaia, wait. Not if no one else finds out," his friend winked at him. "Oh. So it's a secret?" Quote. "Yes." At once, the two were arm in arm. "Secret, secret, 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 secret tilde. Oi. You too," boomed the voice of a large Marine nearby. "Yeah. Why yes, Captain." Quote. The eastern docks need repairing. Join the efforts in fixing it. Yes, Captain, the two saluted. So, Luffy began, as he sat in the aqua bar, looking from Nami to Ichigo. Why is it that it takes an attack from the Marines for the rest of us to find out that you two are related? Why didn't you say you were from the start? Quote. Luffy, we're not related, Nami repeated for the umpteenth time as she attempted to massage an impending headache. And Moon Guy, why didn't we see you back in Nami's hometown that time? Luffy continued questioning. Because we're not related, Ichigo supplied. Maybe they've been fighting for years, suggested Chopper, and now they're finally reconciling. Quote. Wow, it's so nice that you two have finally put your differences aside and are talking to each other again, Frankie blubbered, whilst placing a fresh batch of cola bottles into his stomach, and I'm not crying at all, damn it. Quote. We're not related. Sanji heard Nami and Ichigo snap as he descended the stairs into the room with fresh food and drinks for all. Once all were seated, Robin began. The area of the new world we're in at the moment, she started, is known as the Isles of Aftartos. The 5 immortal glades are 5 immortal rings, so local legend would describe them. Ooh, sounds fun, said Luffy through a mouthful of meat. I read the legend in this book first, said Robin as she held up the book she'd been reading recently, and then I saw something about it back on the sinking island. The local legend tells of an ancient time. A lot of the story has been lost over many millennia and centuries, but the basic story tells of a sky island in which there lived 5 giants, each far larger than any giant today. And each of them had been gifted with a great and powerful ring. However, a large war broke out in their country, as others grew jealous of the rings. To combat this, the giants together threw their rings down into blue sea below, along with the antagonistic characteristics that fueled their county's war. And supposedly that's how the Isles of Aftartos, as they're now called, came to be. Chopper questioned, so we're on some giants' rings? Quote. Golden rings? Nami asked, her eyes turning to belly signs. Remember that it's only a legend, Robin continued, I asked about it in Munkeln earlier. All up there are 5 rings of islands, each ring within the next and each containing less and less islands until the innermost ring contains the single one. And each more treacherous than the last. However, there are 6 different layers. Layer 0 and Layer 1 we've already visited. 0 is known as the Glade of the Gate, or the unofficial gateway to the Isles of Aftartos. The sinking island was one of these gateways. The first ring is known as the Glade of the Calm, in which there lie 5 different islands, one of which is Munkeln. That place was calm? Usopp asked in disbelief. Well, it was until certain people went and attracted the Marines, Zoro supplied. Nami and Ichigo instantly pointed at each other. Luffy snored, already fast asleep. Robin, what are the next rings called? Chopper asked. The second ring is called the Plague, said Robin. Of that, there are 4 possible islands we may land at. From there, the third ring is the Sacrifice, of which there are 3 islands. From there, 2 islands make up the Isle of the Forgotten. And then the final ring contains a single island. That glade is the ocean's icy breath. How scary, Brook shuddered. Sounds tasty, Luffy commented, jerking out of his stupor. Indeed, Robin continued, though legend suggests the final is more stone fortress than island. Many believe it to be myth though. Ah, so it doesn't exist, Chopper sighed happily. I wouldn't be too sure, Robin said. Strange things have been happening in that area recently. The people I spoke to back in Munkeln said something about how tides all over the place have been altered from their already strange patterns, and there are implications of a strange force operating from within that final glade. The island itself is said to harvest no life. It is made up entirely of stone and has twisting caves and canyons both above and below the water, and the weather around it is almost always wild and gray, nearly impossible to get a ship through without it being crushed to dust and its travelers' blood staining the water red. And there's one last thing. The underwater caves and waters of the island are said to be a haven for sea kings. Mystical powers are being gathered there somehow, and connect with the changing tide patterns. That's right, Nami nodded. Apparently there was a tsunami at a nearby island, with no warning or implication, and was strange even by New World standards. Ichigo. The Shinigami looked over at Robin's direct address. What is the name of that Shinigami sword of yours? Quote. Zanjetsu, Ichigo responded. Slaying Moon, said Robin. Ichigo nodded. So you really are from the moon? Said Luffy, smiling as though it had made his day. The moon directly affects the tides, said Nami, though they seem to go by their own patterns here in the New World. Even so, if the power of your sword reflects its name and was taken by a sea king, it seems that the final ring is where your sword has been taken, said Robin. However, getting there is difficult. The log should adapt easily to the first of the 4 rings, but may overlook the final one altogether. If that's the case, we may need to find some sort of eternal pose. That's if one even exists. The final glade is said to be a myth after all. Yet our evidence states otherwise. We'll deal with that when we get closer, Luffy said, and by then Moon Guy may be able to sense that sword well enough that he'll be able to feel the way and direct us to it. Seems like the best idea right now, Sanji contributed, blowing a wisp of smoke from his cigarette, but whoever took it, what are their intentions? Quote. Maybe that Sea King wants to become a Shinigami, Luffy suggested. Yeah, Ichigo said, rolling his eyes, and maybe not. A dark figure descended into a stone chamber. Within the folds of his flowing midnight robes, Zanjetsu was tucked. As the figure continued down into the cold, dark chamber, all that could be heard were his haunting, echoing footsteps as they rebounded off the stone walls, and the sound of his muttering. Still not strong enough. Needs more work. How to unlock its true power. Quote. Finally, he reached his destination, and gently pushed open a single brass door. Without waiting for response, he began to speak. Zanjetsu's owner has entered this world and is intent on retrieving his Zanpakuto. His presence may complicate things, eliminate him. Yes, Master, was the resounding response. The sun had set and dinner time had finished. Ichigo sat on the grassy deck with a few of the straw hats as Frankie set up a small campfire-like structure for the hell of it. Whoever's the youngest has to do it, Frankie had said when it was suggested someone go up and bug Sanji for the same drinks from before. That's always Chopper. Luffy laughed, but I think Moon Guy is the same age. All eyes landed on Chopper and Ichigo. How old are you, bros? Frankie asked. 18, Reindeer and Shinigami echoed one another. When do you turn 19? Zoro pressed further. This December. The doctor chirped excitedly, in a few months. Luffy frowned and scratched his head. But Chopper, didn't you have a birthday the other year? Quote. Well yeah, of course he did, Usopp said smartly as he folded his arms, you would have had one as well. If you didn't have a birthday every year, you'd die. Really? Chopper hollered worriedly, I better make sure I have a birthday then. And you, Ichigo? Nami questioned, when do you turn 19? Quote. Ichigo gulped and remained silent as the rest of the crew looked at him expectantly. Well, Ichigo tilde, Nami probed, poking him and grinning slyly. July. Ah, so next year, Frankie laughed. Wow, Ichigo. Chopper squealed excitedly, eyes sparkling as he jumped into his lap, you're younger than I am. Quote. I honestly don't know how to feel about that, Ichigo admitted as he ruffled Chopper's fur. Go Moon Guy! Cried Luffy enthusiastically, get Sanji to make those drinks. Quote. Ichigo entered the kitchen about a minute later to see Sanji had already prepared the drinks and was ready to take them down. Hey, about earlier, don't worry about having to tag along with us, Sanji said, remembering the conversation about the final glade, we're headed for the final island of the Grand Line, so this is on our way anyway. If anything, only the place where your sword is will be off route. But still, said Ichigo, you're doing all this, just for me. You barely even know me. It's true, said Sanji, as the two of them reached the others, there's a lot about you we don't know. Likewise, Ichigo laughed, recalling the crew's impressive power from earlier in the day, whilst he handed around drinks. We have plenty of time tonight, Nami said, before taking a sip from her glass, why not tell us a bit more about yourself? Quote. Yeah, how did you become a substitute Shinigami? Usopp asked as he came up out of nowhere, well below deck, actually. Yoho tilde and what was that scary mask? Brook asked, wandering over and taking a seat, soon to be joined by Robin, who'd come out from the women's quarters. What kind of fights did you do when you were on the moon? Luffy asked, did you fight any really strong guys? Quote. Gee, so many questions, Ichigo commented, noting that now the entire crew had gathered to hear him. He began, let's see, where to begin, well in the world I come from, well in the Soul Society at least, there was this one guy. He defected from the Shinigami and wanted to overthrow the Soul King. Soul King? Usopp questioned, isn't that you, Brook? Quote. You're the Soul King? Ichigo gaped at the skeleton. I had no idea this Shinigami fellow you speak of existed, let alone he had it in for me. Brook panicked, and he's a ghost. A ghost? And Grim Reaper type at that, death personified. Although I guess I kind of am. It's obviously a different Soul King if this happened a while ago. Not to mention Brook is the Soul King of music, not Shinigami, said Nami. Oh, good, Ichigo and Brook sighed in relief. In Ichigo's opinion, Brook was far too ridiculous to be the king who reigned over Soul Society and the subject of the entire Winter War. He continued, apparently he'd been planning to do it for some time, but finally did it not all that long after I first got my Shinigami powers. He'd been waiting for that one moment, and had planned it all. Anyway, he had some sort of god complex. One of those types. Ichigo laughed and looked up at the sky, it's actually a really long story if I tell you from the start. We have time. Luffy chirped, and I love stories. Especially awesome ones with lasers and monsters and stuff. Ooh. Me too. Chopper chorused, his eyes shining brightly. Then I guess you'll like this one, Ichigo said with a friendly smirk, before beginning, telling them everything from that night over 2.5 years prior onwards. The Straw Hats made a very good audience, save for Luffy interrupting with inappropriate comments from time to time. So, do hollows crap? Quote, huh. What? How would I know? Quote, what about a Rancor? They'd have bums at least, wouldn't they? Quote, I'm not sure. If you ever meet one, ask it. Luffy. Shut up and let him continue. Nami snapped in exasperation as she whacked her captain over the head. Ichigo continued, now telling of events that had transpired in Hueco Mundo. There were times when all, even Luffy, remained silent in anticipation of what may have happened next. There were times when some, namely Brook, would shudder in fear over the prospect of raging hollows and rampant spirits. There were times when the sparkles of admiration in Luffy, Usopp and Chopper's eyes rivaled that of the clear night sky. And there were times when even Zoro and Robin seemed shocked or amazed by Ichigo's exploits. Eventually, Ichigo told of the lead-up to his final battle with Aizen. A butterfly. Quote, yeah. He had a mullet too. Awesome. Quote, really. Quote. He went on to explain Aizen and Jin's departure to the true Karakura town and his father's part in making sure he went after them. I trained with Tensa Zangetsu within my inner world and in the Dongai, where I was able to train for 3 months in what was otherwise only an hour. In the end, the reason Zangetsu didn't want to teach me the technique was because he wanted to protect me. If I were to use it, I'd lose all my spiritual power. There was silence as he continued. But I needed to protect the people of my town. Zangetsu understood that and we parted. So I came out of the Dongai and found Aizen. While I was away, Jin had turned on him. Turned out he was something like a double agent the entire time, but still couldn't take Aizen out. So I defeated him in the only way he could be brought down. It wasn't quite enough to do him out completely, but enough for Urahara-san to come along and seal him. But because I'd used the final Getsuga Tenshou, I lost all my spirit powers. I was able to say goodbye and thank you to Rukia just as she faded from my sight. She disappeared right in front of my eyes, along with any of my remaining spirit energy. By this point, Frankie was bawling. Wah! That's so heartbreaking, Ichi bro. Ichigo paled as the massive cyborg crushed him in some sort of manly sympathy hug thing. You're a real man, you know. Thanks, bro. Ichigo awkwardly pat the cyborg on the back as best he could. And at this point you didn't have any more of your powers? Nami questioned, you couldn't even see the plus spirits? Quote. Ichigo shook his head, nope. All my spiritual energy was gone. Did you die? Luffy asked, sounding concerned. Yes, Ichigo responded sarcastically, finally giving in to Luffy's stupid questions. I died and now I'm here talking to you. Well, that makes the two of us. Yo ho ho. Brook's skeletal hand clapped Ichigo on the shoulder like it would a long-lost friend. Wow, Ichigo. So you really are a ghost? Chopper pipped up. Yeah. Ghost. Brook instantly fled from Ichigo's side and cowered behind Robin, who smirked. Well, you technically are in a spirit form at the moment, aren't you, Ichigo? Quote. Well, yeah, said Ichigo, I'm not dead though. My actual body is back in Karakura town with Khan, my spiritual powers reawoke just recently. Urahara must have done something with the Garganta that makes people in this world see me. And what about that hollow you had? Zoro asked, recalling certain events from Ichigo's story. Ichigo shrugged. He hasn't bothered me since I got my powers back. Ichigo and the crew continued talking further into the night, during which Ichigo learned more about them. He learned of an old ship they owned before the Sunny, the Going Merry. He learned of an island of sand and a desert princess. Of a giant whale and an island powered by water. Of huge haunted ghost ships, giants, okamas, weird animals, islands in the sky and more. There were times he laughed along with them and times he sat still and simply listened. And yet, Ichigo was sure, it was hardly the tip of the iceberg. Their entire story was too long to tell, as were some details of his own. One by one, the crew began heading to their quarters for the night, exchanging the odd, "good night," and "see you tomorrow." Soon, all that remained were Ichigo, Luffy and Zoro, the latter of whom appeared to have dozed off anyway. Ichigo watched as Luffy scrambled over to the fading fire, using an iron rod to tamper with the still red coals so to rekindle the flame. He chuckled as the rubber boy blew into the fire, only causing it to fade further, before shrugging and leaving it be. The young captain proceeded to move over to his first mate and crouch down in front of him. For a moment, Ichigo wasn't sure what he was doing. Until he noticed Luffy waving a hand in front of Zoro's face, as though he were checking whether the older pirate were asleep or not. Content, he moved back to his seat and stared deeply at the small surviving flames, as they crackled weakly into nothingness. As the light generated by the flames faded, the light provided by the sky was seemingly enhanced. Ichigo gazed up at the celestial wonderland that lay before him. He had often wondered if the stars that shone in the Soul Society were the same as those in the world of the living, without ever being too sure. But the night sky that lay before him now was definitely different, thought that was to be expected. He was in a different world after all, and that meant a different part of the universe, if it was even the same one. Free of the pollution of a busy Japanese city, the sky here was clear. As clear as the Soul Society, possibly clearer due to being out at sea. And for a number of minutes he and Luffy sat in silence, simply gazing into the eternal shimmering expanse and resting in each other's presence. After what could have been close to half an hour, Luffy spoke. Ichigo. Ichigo's ears perked upon hearing his actual name uttered by the Straw Hat Captain, and not just because he'd been half asleep. Sure, he had encouraged the correct mentioning of his name from the boy from the start, but now he'd heard it, it seemed strange and surreal. Why, yes, Luffy. Ichigo opened his eyes and regarded him from across the dwindling glow of embers. He noticed Luffy's gaze was not locked in his own, but rather engaged in the light of the large full moon, though trying to glimpse somewhere far beyond it. Searching for something an infinite distance away. He seemed serious for once. A small frown graced his features, one hand tightly enclosing the fabric over which Ichigo knew the large scar decorated. He opened his mouth slightly, searching for whichever words he wished to use before beginning. You can see the dead. Can't you? Quote. Ichigo frowned slightly. It was more of a statement than a question, and a tone that seemed almost foreign on Luffy. Yes, Ichigo replied. And you can talk to them? Quote. Yeah. Before a Shinigami sends them over to the Soul Society, at least. But it's not like I can go find or choose whoever I want to talk to, only the wandering pluses that are around at the time. That's how it works where I come from anyway. No clue how that stuff works here, I haven't really seen any spirits. Luffy's eyes trailed from distant space to the last of the embers as the last glow faded and the deck was swamped by moonlight alone. Oh. Ichigo's frown deepened, as he continued to regard Luffy's out-of-character demeanor. "Are you all right?" he asked, his concern showing more than he intended. Quickly snapping back into reality, Luffy smiled large and wholeheartedly. "Moon Guy, you ask so many questions. Quote, you're the one who's been asking stupid questions all night." Ichigo snapped. Luffy only laughed in response. Ichigo tried to ignore the obnoxious cackle at first, but soon found himself chuckling along, unsure why but enjoying it all the same. It seemed this crazy world was finally taking its toll on him. Although his current strongest desire was to be reunited with Zangetsu and return home somehow, right at this moment he wouldn't choose to be in any other place. When the laughing finally died down, the two locked eye contact. "Guess we'd better get some rest, hey?" Ichigo commented. It had been one hell of a long day after all, and he was pretty damn tired. "Yosh," Luffy responded, somehow still full of energy. "Rest. Last person to bed is the bigger idiot." Quote. Neither noticed as the supposedly sleeping swordsman cracked open his one good eye, marking the young substitute Shinigami as he and Luffy hurried toward the sleeping quarters. Chapter 6. You gotta start at number 1. I hate you. The statement was both simple and profound, and given the circumstances, Khan was not about to apprehend the words of his blue-haired accomplice. "I completely and utterly despise you." It was true that their luck on their journey so far had been bittersweet. When the idiot shopkeeper had opened up the Garganta for them to enter this quirky, questionable world, they had been lucky enough to land themselves on an island rather than somewhere out in endless ocean. However, the island was, well, the dancing Okama on the Mardi Gras-esque float they were currently hiding beneath was enough to explain. "How is this my fault?" Khan finally snapped when Grimjow opened his mouth to express his greatest affections once again. "Really, if this is anyone's fault, it's Urahara's." "Yeah, but it's your fault those weirdos have been chasing us." Khan instantly adopted a very emo position. "I know. I thought they were girls. They really were perfect traps." Grimjow growled. "Ever heard the saying, always look before you leap?" Quote. Khan whimpered in response. "Anyway," Grimjow said, peering through a gap in the float's material, "our first priority is to escape." Zoro yawned lethargically, and this time he really meant it. In the 2 days since leaving Munkeln, already they'd encountered one large storm and an infinitely rough sea. It had been about 2 that morning when Nami had burst into the men's quarters to alert them all that a storm was on the way and that she required all hands on deck. Storms in the New World were in a completely different league to that of the former half of the Grand Line. It was a miracle no one had fallen overboard. The wind and rain had been deafening and the swell had been tremendous. Somehow, the rain had formed a strange type of hail that was shaped almost like a needle and caused an already dangerous situation to become all the more perilous. But that was to be expected of the New World. And it wasn't just the seascape, but the islands and potential enemies as well. Zoro wouldn't be the only one to admit that he'd really needed those 2 years to train and grow stronger. He sighed as Luffy thundered past him, seemingly unfazed by any strain on energy that may have been brought upon by the early morning's endeavors. Possibly because he'd just had a full-sized breakfast, a full Luffy-sized breakfast at that, but nonetheless. During breakfast, Nami had estimated a couple more days until the next island, whichever of the 4 in the glade of the plague it might be. The plague? Zoro thought idly as Luffy and Chopper began pesking Ichigo about something, or rather. What's that supposed to mean? Ichigo straightened up from the sit-up session he had engaged himself in for the past half hour, to reach for the katana Zoro had lent him and enact a few blows. It still didn't feel right and he knew it never really would. This is only temporary, he reminded himself. As soon as I get Zangetsu back, I can fight with him and we can work out a way to get back to Karakura town. So Ichigo, a high-pitched voice broke through his concentration. Ichigo looked over to see Chopper gazing admiringly up at him. What other things can you do? Quote. What do you mean by that? Ichigo questioned. Well, you can fly, move really fast and put a mask on. Is there anything else? Quote. Yeah, Moon Guy, Luffy said, suddenly dropping down from up in the crow's nest. What other cool things are there? Quote. I'd need Zangetsu to show you, Ichigo said, but I can send shock waves sort of like a beam. Both the captain and reindeer questioned, eyes shining brightly. Yeah, I suppose, Ichigo shrugged. Luffy pouted. I really wanna see that, he said. A sudden thought came to Ichigo. It was something he'd never personally used, but given his current situation, he considered the potential need to rely on it. There's this one thing that Shinigami can do though, he supplied. I've never used it myself, but I've seen it done enough times to have the basic idea of how it works. It's called Kido. Kind of like a spell. Ooh, Moon Guy's gonna do a magic trick, Luffy announced. Nami sat up from her nearby deck chair and Frankie momentarily paused the repairs he was giving one of the ship's rails. Hey, wait! Snapped Ichigo, I never said I was gonna do it. I've never tried it before. But a look from the curious crew members to the expectant smiles on Chopper and Luffy's faces set Ichigo groaning. Alright, he sighed, I'll see what I can do, but there's a lot of different spells. How do they work? Chopper asked. From what I know, there's Hado which are destructive and Bakuto which are for binding. Each have spells numbered 1 to 99, but it depends on how hard they are. I guess I could start with a slightly higher one though. Very mysterious, Luffy commented with a nod. Ignoring him, Ichigo focused of remembering any spell that sprung to mind. Let's see, he thought out loud, how does Rukia normally do it? Envisioning the familiar form of the small dark-haired Shinigami in his mind, Ichigo mimicked the pose. Holding his right arm out in front of himself, he grasped his elbow steadily with his left hand and aimed out into the ocean. By now, he had the attention of half the crew, all of whom were looking on in anticipation and interest. Ichigo cleared his throat, before focusing on what he could of his spiritual pressure and beginning. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Truth and temperance, upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash but slightly the wrath of your claws. He recited the incantation he'd heard countless times, before firing out over the ship's rails. Hado number 33. Sokatsui. Quote. At once, a burst of blue light formed, only to backfire on him and blow up in his face. What followed was silence save for an "ooh" from Luffy, followed by his stifled clapping. Ichigo wasn't completely sure if the guy was mocking him or genuinely impressed at the display the substitute Shinigami had just given. Though judging by what he knew of Luffy, it was probably the latter. Is it Frankie cleared his throat after a moment's pause, is it meant to do that? Quote. Ichigo began, wiping soot from his eyes, that was my first time trying Kido, when Rukia does it, it shoots outwards. I don't know much about this Kido thing, Nami commented, but if you've never done it before, wouldn't it be best to start with the easiest one? Quote. Number 1 comes before number 33, Moon Guy. Yes Luffy, I know how to count. But I guess you're right. Maybe I'll try some other time. As if I'm gonna attempt a level 1, Ichigo thought, if I fail that, I'll look stupid. And with that, he returned to aimlessly swinging and stabbing the katana at an invisible enemy. In the streets of Umschlagstadt, Munkeln, reparations were underway for the Straw Hats' most recent escapade. Much to the elation of many of the officers residing there, a newer, much more efficient Den Mushi system was being installed in place of the old one. In the midst of the reparations, G5's Rear Admiral Smoker and Captain Tashigi wound their way through the town's main street. Eventually, they located a large makeshift shelter in which many of the town's officers were currently taking a dinner break. However, upon the arrival of the two higher-ups, the officers ceased their chewing and delivered their undivided attention. So, Smoker questioned them upon entering, what exactly happened here? Was it Straw Hat? Quote. Yes sir, spoke one of the commanders after swallowing a mouthful of mashed potato, we discovered them in the markets and attacked, but they escaped us. Oh, and it seems they have a new crew member. The officers have been saying that he's the brother of cat burglar Nami. They were seen shopping together and share a resemblance. It's the hair, a nearby officer contributed. In any case, said Smoker, plucking a plate up from the pile and serving up his own potato mash, if he is aiding or part of the Straw Hats crew as you say he is, he may become a threat. Was he strong? Quote. Damn strong, another officer whimpered, and he had something like Geppo and some other weird abilities. As the officer continued his account, Smoker listened on in high interest. Tashigi, however, had her attention on a pair of young Marines whom were sitting nearby and frantically whispering across to one another. If what you're sharing is really important, she addressed them, gaining their and the surrounding Marines' attention, I'm sure you can share it with us all. The two young officers were suddenly aware of the disturbance they had caused. We didn't see anything. The first one hurriedly stated. Nothing at all. Quote. We especially didn't give directions to Roronoa Zoro. Quote. Tashigi raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He's useless when it comes to knowing which way to go, you know. Yeah he is, isn't he? The first one, a boy with wavy purple hair, laughed. He ran around the building so many times before we helped him, his friend laughed along. However, the two immediately ceased their laughing when they realized what they'd just said. Before you helped him, Smoker quoted, a clump of ash falling from one of his cigars as he mashed his potato mash even more. Yeah. Both boys shrieked as the Rear Admiral's menacing demeanor advanced on them. Rear Admiral Smoker, the purple-haired one whispered across to his small, brace-faced companion, I hear he's a nice guy, except for when he's not. His companion haphazardly ran his fingers through his sandy-colored hair, partially upsetting the marine cap that had been firmly tucked over his head. He's going to demote us. He spoke hurriedly, he'll send us somewhere boring. Like East Blue. Yeah. Not East Blue. Quote. But I've heard there's heaps of unknown pirates there. Quote. Yeah. Danger. Quote. Yeah. Quote. You do realize you're stationed in the New World, Tashigi said blankly. Ah, so East Blue will be nice, like a holiday. Ah, a holiday, only we'll be demoted. Quote. Yeah. Don't demote us. Quote. What are your names? Smoker demanded, unfazed by the two's idiotic exchange. Quote. Your names, Smoker maintained. The boys gulped. Charlie, supplied the smaller one. Merlin, stated the purple-haired one as he silently fiddled with the pair of glasses tucked into his pants pocket. I see, the rear admiral exhaled, breathing out a plume of smoke. I'm not going to demote you. But it's time you learned a lesson. Now, how would you like to join me in a little boat ride? Quote. Sanji. Hey Sanji. Quote. The cook looked over from where he was restocking the kitchen to see Chopper popping in through the doorway. Luffy, Usopp and I are playing tag, but it would be more fun if other people joined in. Can you join us? Quote. Sanji chuckled as the small reindeer intently beamed up at him, anticipating his response. I'm sorry Chopper, he replied, but I need to finish what I'm doing here, and then I'm going to make drinks for Robin-chan and Nami-san. Why not ask Zoro? Quote. We already tried that, Chopper pouted. Then what about someone else? Quote. Before Chopper could respond, Luffy snaked his way through an opening in the kitchen's window. Is it time for lunch? He asked his cook obnoxiously. You've just had lunch. And you had 5 servings. Sanji snapped as he swipe-kicked Luffy's extending arm from grasping a nearby stack of meat. Is it nearly dinner? Luffy grumbled. No, replied Sanji, really, it's early afternoon, come back a little later and I'll have something ready for afternoon tea. Okay. Luffy complied, skipping out of the room, but not without grabbing a single strip of ham as he left. Once the two were outside, they regrouped with Usopp to report on their success or lack thereof. Zoro and Frankie said they were busy, but all Zoro was doing was sleeping. Brook and Sanji wouldn't do it either. Quote. Ichigo and Nami said no as well. Those darn siblings. But we still haven't asked Robin yet. Chopper pointed out, eyes wide with excitement. Yosh. Said Luffy, let's all go and ask Robin if she'll play. If more of us go, she'll be less likely to refuse. And if she refuses, we'll refuse. Quote. Yosh. Usopp and Chopper joined their captain in fisting the air, before running off to locate the ship's archaeologist. That doesn't make sense, Nami muttered from nearby. The three were midway in running up the deck, intent on reaching the library where Robin was probably currently spending her time, when an unfamiliar voice stole their attention. Tag. That sounds like fun, the voice sounded from somewhere off the ship. Who's that? The three ran to the side of the ship and looked down into the water. In the sea before them, 5 figures sat. Aside from a set of fins sprouting from each arm, pointed ears, and some with slight unnatural tinges in the skin colors, they appeared fully human. Fishmen? Luffy questioned with a confused frown. Sea nymphs, one corrected, leaping up onto the Sunny's deck, and affirming a set of fins on the outside of each leg, just below the knee, as well as a fine set of gills positioned at either side of the neck. The sea nymph was tall and muscular with tanned skin. Tribal paints decorated the unclothed upper half of his body and he had a grin almost as unruly as his waist-length dark hair on which a headdress of feathers rested. Otherwise, he wore an assortment of hides, somewhat resembling a. He's wearing a skirt, was the first thing Luffy observed. Well, it was more like a loincloth, but still. Where is Kurosaki Ichigo? The man questioned. You mean Moon Guy? He's somewhere on the ship. Are you his friend or something? Quote. The tanned sea nymph grinned again, before answering, "Yes, we're best friends." "Hey Ichigo," Chopper called out excitedly, despite the fact the man's remark had been dripping with sarcasm, "your best friend is here." Quote. Ichigo came up the stairs and observed the man before him. "You're not Keigo or Chad." "The name's Wishram," the man said. "And these are..." A strong-looking dark, but slightly orange-skinned woman with a thick torrent of midnight hair dressed in minimal fur clothing leapt up beside him, wielding an angled wooden-looking weapon. Yingarna. A feminine-looking man with golden laurels positioned in his glowing white hair and soft violet skin adorned with a milky knee-length toga and brown sandals stepped up. Perseus. A tall man of oriental appearance and grassy complexion with a long plait of dark hair and adorned with robes of reds and oranges, which strangely did not appear to be wet at all, joined the growing company. Wu Yu. Finally, a young girl with pale aqua skin and glowing shoulder-length blonde hair stepped up. A single long strand of hair made its way down her body of numerous warm furs and sea skins, leading into a beaded single feather. And Senda. By now, some of the other Straw Hats had come to see what the fuss was about. Nami had followed the three tag players to the source of the new noise. Zoro had been roused from his sleep and had come to see the source of the commotion, and Robin had stepped out of the library and created a chain of arms to lower herself down to the deck. "Well then," Luffy said, smiling over to his friends, "these weird sea guys said they'd play tag with us." "Actually, it was Perseus who said he'd play tag with you," Yingarna corrected. "Ah," Luffy said, turning to the white-haired man and observing his attire. A dress. Before he could say anything else, however, the sea nymph charged at him, wielding a strange gun-like device he'd summoned from within his toga. Luffy questioned as the gun went off. With a fluid movement, he dodged the projectile, a fine blast of water, watching as it tore through one of the sails and continued through the air. "Oi, what was that about?" Zoro questioned, reaching for his katanas. Perseus smiled. "A warning shot. Hope you're ready." He turned to his companions. "You know the plan. Let's go." Swiftly, the other four sea nymphs dispersed themselves to other members on the ship. "All right. Group tag." Luffy cried happily as he scurried across the deck. "You're it, dress guy." Quote. "Hey what? Wait." Perseus began chasing after Luffy. "I didn't mean I'd really play tag with you." Quote. Without a second thought, Ichigo pulled out his katana and went to fight the closest one, Wu Yu, before being sidelined by the wild, robust figure of Wishram. "You're to fight me," he instructed. "Okay." Ichigo questioned. "What are they here for?" Before he knew it, Wishram withdrew a long spear seemingly from nowhere. Instinctively, Ichigo drew back from the spear's long reach and brandished his katana. "Ever fought against a spear wielder?" Wishram questioned. "Once," Ichigo answered, recalling his fight with Akaku. "Well then, seems as though you're experienced." Before Ichigo knew it, Wishram was leaping above him, positioned to strike. Faster still, Ichigo held the katana before him, easily fending off Wishram's attack. "Quite strong," Wishram noted as he withdrew. It continued as such for another few moments, Ichigo easily blocking blows from the sea nymph, yet finding it increasingly difficult to work strikes of his own. "You're just playing around," Ichigo said with a glare as he again easily blocked an impending strike. "If you want to try and strike me, then come right ahead." Wishram brandished his spear, ready for any sword-style attack. "All right then." Ichigo gained a sudden idea. Positioning his arms in front of him the same way he had that morning, he recited a familiar phrase. Hado number 1. Show. Quote. A blast of yellow energy shot out from his palm, instantly taking Wishram by surprise and throwing him back several meters. Hey, Ichigo smiled, it worked, kinda. A B-E-E-E-E-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-M. Luffy shouted as he ran by, an irate Perseus at his tail. Well then, the sea nymph grinned, you're quite good. It's time I lifted my game a little. Ichigo's eyes widened as Wishram held the spear out before him and recited a command. Watch the people, watch the river. See all, Sagagla. Quote. There's 5 of you and 10 of us, said Zoro as he engaged in combat with Wu Yu, whom wielded 3 daggers between the fingers of each hand. You're outnumbered. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Wu Yu cautioned, before reaching deep within his robe and withdrawing an odd-looking seal. Oi Marimo, who's the weirdo? Sanji questioned, seemingly coming out of nowhere and drop-kicking said weirdo from above. There's a whole group of them, Zoro explained, I'm not quite sure what to make of them though. He eyed the one who was infuriatedly chasing after Luffy. Ooh, they have ladies as well, Sanji said, only visible eye alternating between lingering on Senda and Yingarna. Stay focused, idiot. Zoro snapped as used a katana to swipe one of Wu Yu's offending knives out of a hand. Wu Yu leapt to his feet. Brilliant teamwork there, he commended them, the 2 of you must share quite the friendship. Zoro and Sanji glanced across to each other expressionlessly. At any rate, you won't be catching me off guard a 3rd time, Wu Yu unleashed the binding on the scroll. Soar over the Western Ocean. Ow run. Quote. Looks like it's the 2 of us, Senda flicked her long feathered strand behind her as she took Nami as her opponent. Nami withdrew her Klima attack and prepared to attack. However, she turned as Frankie emerged from below deck. What's going on here? He asked, tilting up his sunglasses as he observed the mayhem. Strange people from the sea, Nami explained. Is there one for me? I'm feeling especially super this week. Of course you are, Nami deadpanned. Go bother someone else. Senda demanded, an icy slate forming at the tip of her hand as she charged at the cyborg. Frankie was too fast, catching her pale aquatic hand before it could reach him. Your fingers, he said, observing the girl's hand, they're artificial. Nami took a closer look. It was true, what remained of her true fingers were less than stumps of their original fittings. In place were joints of ice. Senda raised an eyebrow and observed the cyborg's body. You're one to talk. Swiftly, she yanked her hand from Frankie's grip and turned to face Nami. You wanted someone to fight, artificial man. She reached into the folds of her furred clothing, withdrawing what appeared to be a pair of walrus tusks and held them out in front of her in a crisscrossed shape. Chill to the core. Kyler Tang. Quote. A vaporous mist wafted from the meeting point of the tusks, and from the mist a bird-like form emerged. Luffy narrowly dodged as a jet of water whizzed past his left ear. The guy was getting pretty pissed off, and it was amusing. However, by this point Luffy had discerned the situation at hand may have been more serious than he first thought, and he ceased his idiotic scramble. When Perseus finally caught up, he paused for a moment to catch his breath. If you didn't really come to play tag, then why are you here? Luffy asked. That's not for you to know, Perseus sneered at him. Won't you tell us at least? Chopper asked, walking over in his heavy point. The bear talked. Quote. I'm a reindeer. Quote. Either way, I'll never tell you, Perseus laughed. Really though, it's a pain that Kurosaki Ichigo had to be traveling along with such a strong group of pirates. Otherwise Boss Shearwater only would have had to send Wishram to eliminate him. Shearwater? Chopper questioned. Crap. I've said too much. Perseus cursed at himself. Just forget I said that, okay? Quote. Luffy and Chopper stared at him blankly. What makes you think you can take out Moon Guy so easily? Quote. Well, seeing as Kurosaki's missing part of his soul and all. Huh. Missing part of his soul? Chopper and Luffy questioned in confusion. You two have no idea, Perseus chuckled. Having a Zanpakuto is like having a spiritual manifestation. It's a part of you. When someone's been separated from it in the way Kurosaki has, well then, yeah. I'm saying too much again. Quote. This guy tells his secrets too easily, Chopper observed. Luffy glared at Perseus. I don't know what you, the skirt guy, that Shearwater person or those others are planning. But we're getting that big sword back. So go get your own Moon Guy. Gomu no. Luffy's arms extended behind him, before swiftly rocketing out in front of him and plowing into the unprepared Perseus, sending him flying. Axe. To tell you the truth, I don't find much use in this. I think I might discard it, Yingarna said, swinging a water jet pistol from one finger and not even batting a dark eyelash as Perseus went flying through the air nearby, seemingly from nowhere. It seemed she was growing bored of fighting with the apparently mundane weapon. Is it the same for your panties? Brook questioned. Robin didn't react as Yingarna hauled the pistol at Brook's skull, making contact with a well-deserved and hollow clunk. Now from what my source has told me, I'd be a fool to think I could take on more than one member of this ship single-handedly, she said. Seeing as there are now two of you, bring the water, bring the rain. Ingoliad. Quote. From within Yingarna's body, a serpent of every color uncoiled before the skeleton and archaeologist, ready to strike. And now, the dark-skinned woman smirked, we can fight 2 on 2. What is that? Ichigo questioned, looking on in grotesque fascination at Wishram's ability. This thing here, Wishram said, indicating to the large-eyed eagle-like female figure to his right, as a Vakiva. They are released manifestations of our spirits. Mine is called Sagagla. The way he summoned it, Ichigo thought, is just like a Shikai or Resurrection command, but why? Observing his surroundings, Ichigo could see that some of the other sea nymphs had undergone a likewise spirit manifestation, all of which were now fighting a member of the crew. Your guard is right down. Ichigo barely registered in time to block Wishram's vicious attack. Damn it, he's strong. He was easy enough to block, but attacking someone with a long-range weapon was difficult without Zangetsu. It isn't easy, is it? Wishram seemed to echo his thoughts, fighting without the weapon you're used to, that is. Suddenly, it dawned on Ichigo. What have you done with Zangetsu? He demanded. Your Zanpakuto is in good hands, Wishram assured him. What have you done with him? He demanded once again, attacking with increased vigor. Kurosaki, Wishram cautioned, you're forgetting that this battle is now 2 on 1. Ichigo looked over just in time to witness Sagagla release a deep purple ball of energy from her beak-like mouth. Crap, he thought to himself as he tried to move, yet was restricted by Wishram's onslaught. Midori Boshi. Trampolia. Quote. A sudden impact shot both the energy ball and Sagagla up into the air from what appeared to be a large bubbled flower. And now it's 2-on-2, said Usopp as he stepped forth, gray slingshot in hand. Thanks for that, said Ichigo. Long-range opponents are my specialty, the sharpshooter explained whilst reaching into his bag and withdrawing a handful of loose shrapnel. Sagagla responded from the air with a hiss, immediately engaging in combat with the sniper. Ichigo gave Usopp a nod as he went about fighting the all-seeing being, before turning to Wishram. I know I haven't had my Zanpakuto to aid me in this fight, he said, but no more messing around. I'm going to defeat you and get him back from that icy ocean place. Wishram's eyes widened. How did you? Before he could finish, Ichigo had summoned dark power in the form of a mask, and wasted no time in delivering the best of the attacks he could access. The man named Shearwater looked on into an icy void and watched as his sea nymphs fought against the pirate crew. Once again, Sagala's all-seeing ability was coming in useful when tracking others. His attention in particular lingered upon Zanjetsu's owner, as the substitute Shinigami fought with another katana, rhythmically striking and blocking with almost every inhale and exhale. Even without Zanjetsu he is strong. He continued watching in fascination as he relied on other means to fight, trying to compensate for his lack of his Zanpakuto. Shearwater watched as Kurosaki soared through the air and fought at almost untraceable speeds, at times even shooting balls of energy of donning a fearsome mask that temporarily amplified his powers, and shooting beams of red with that raw idle power. As Shearwater gazed at the impressive Zanpakuto sword before him, he gained a sudden insight. Perhaps, he mused, staring into the icy void, letting this Kurosaki live may not be a terrible thing. He will come to seek me out, of course, but perhaps, as the true owner, he can unlock Zanjetsu's full potential for this cause. Immediately, he stood from the throne-like structure of his seat and paced the room. Yes, why didn't I see it before? He's still quite powerful. With him, I can unleash my full power. And by the looks of it, he's headed here anyway. He paced across the room, his footsteps echoing in the chamber as he approached the icy void and cleared his throat. Return, all of you, and leave the boy, he called. There has been a slight change to our plans. Without waiting for a response, he withdrew from the void and chuckled intently. Come, Kurosaki Ichigo. Well then, Straw Hat, Perseus, having returned from being thrown through the air, observed the pirate before him. Maybe I should bring someone out for that bear friend of yours. I'm a reindeer. Chopper snapped, suddenly reverting to his walk point to prove it. Expand and constrict, Perseus recited, positioning a hand to his laurels. Andro. There was a sudden break in the battle aboard the Sunny as a rumbling voice spoke to them from nowhere. It seems like boss is calling us back, Yingarna said with a frown. He's changed the plan? Senda questioned. Perseus sneered and dived into the water without giving a further word. Wishram growled as Ichigo's visored mask dissolved, before giving his spear a final shove, sending Ichigo skidding backwards. You all heard the man, he yelled loudly so that all his companions might hear, let's retreat. In a flourish, the others both willingly and begrudgingly took their leave, diving back into the ocean's depths. Oi, wait a moment, Usopp shouted as Sagagla was reabsorbed by Wishram, what's going on? Who's this boss guy and what does he want from Ichigo? Quote. All to be answered in due time, Wishram answered. What does he want with Zanjetsu? Ichigo questioned further, but met no response. Just a heads up for you though, Wishram cautioned, in the fourth glade, just before the ocean's icy breath, there lie two different islands. One means paradise whilst the other is peril. Know this. The dead sleep during the day and come out at night. And with that, the sea nymph leapt off the sunny and down into the ocean below. Ichigo turned to Usopp, what was that all about? Quote. The sniper shrugged, beats me, it would probably be smart to remember what he said though. Meanwhile up in the ship's sails, Yingarna seemed unimpressed by the battle's sudden end but obediently retreated to the ocean nonetheless, Goliath at her side. However, intent on having the last blow, the serpent extended its tail to an unsuspecting Robin, swiftly whipping her feet out from beneath her and causing her to plummet towards the sea below. Damn it, she muttered as her extra hands failed to grab hold of a solid surface before she plunged into the salty water. Splash! Alerted by the sound of his crewmate crashing into the water, Luffy hurried to the ship's rail, to see the evidence of her fall in the form of ripples about 8 meters from the ship. Robin! Luffy yelled over the commotion, before diving overboard, I'll save you. Quote. No. Luffy. A worried cry escaped Chopper's lips, as the little reindeer hurried to the edge of the deck, where he jumped after his captain. Chopper. You aren't able to swim, remember? Brook shouted whilst throwing his skeletal body from the ship in his efforts to rescue the doctor. Splash. 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 Ichigo's face changed from its pondering over what Wishram had said, and instead adopted a deadpanned expression as he stared at the 4 sets of ripples now littering the water's unsteady surface. Please tell me those 3 didn't just. However, the hurried curses of Zoro, Usopp and Sanji as the 3 of them quickly shed hindrances such as jackets and shoes only confirmed the situation Ichigo had thought may have been too stupid to have actually occurred. Honestly, this entire experience is doing my head in, he thought as he joined the effort in rescuing the drowning crew members. Idiots. Sanji spat. We're sorry, we're sorry, we're sorry. The ship's captain, musician and doctor apologized frantically as the cook glowered over them. Whether you're sorry or not makes no difference. The 3 of you are well aware you can't swim. We should have just let you drown, maybe then you wouldn't do such stupid things. Quote. But we'd die if you let us drown. Chopper fretted. Though I already am dead, Brook pointed out. I'm hungry, Luffy noted over the sound of his gurgling stomach. Will any of you take this seriously? Sanji demanded as he whacked the 3 of them over the head with his leg at once. Robin stood nearby, a blanket draped over her shoulders as she watched the crew's only other fruit users being told off by the cook. A small smile graced her features as the 3 made their own characteristic remarks. They may have been idiots, but it had been the thought that counted, right? One of them left this here, said Frankie as he approached her, holding up one of the water gun devices. I'm going to pull it apart later and see how it works, but for now, the Sunny comes first. How long were they here for? 10 minutes. Quote. Not very long, actually, Robin confirmed. They left only just after unleashing those weird things of theirs, Zoro remarked, kind of anticlimactic of them. Frankie scowled, and still they managed to make a mess of things. I can help, Usopp offered, intent on getting to the part where the strange pistol would be dissected and observing the internal mechanism. As the 2 men got to work, Nami approached. I wonder, she mused, what was that plan those people were talking about? Quote. Robin shrugged, more importantly, who sent them? Quote. As the sun began to descend upon the ocean's distant horizon, Ichigo paced the deck thoughtlessly. Following the fleeting battle, he'd been visited by another wave of queasiness. Seasickness. He wondered to himself, before deciding to wait it out down in the aqua bar. He made it down the first 3 stairs before promptly tripping over his own feet and consequently tumbling down the rest of the flight, landing in a position not unlike the one he landed in upon breaching the Soul Society for the first time. Believing for a moment that no one had been around to observe his impromptu downward trip, Ichigo breathed a sigh of relief. However, he then saw that the aqua bar was not otherwise unoccupied. Brook sat watching him from a seat by the glass, where he sipped on a cup of tea. Yo ho ho! The skeleton laughed. That was quite the dynamic entrance, Ichigo-san. And such a creative landing position. Quote. Don't mention it, Ichigo muttered whilst twisting out of his awkward position on the ground. Allow me, Brook said. He set down his cup of tea and rose from his seat, before wandering over to Ichigo and offering a white skeletal hand. You helped me out of a slight predicament back there, so allow me to take this opportunity to repay a friend in need. A predicament, hey? Ichigo questioned as he took the musician's outstretched hand and was hauled back up on his feet with strength surprising of what otherwise might have been a long dead pile of bones. I understand you wanted to help Robin and those 2 idiots, but jumping in after them, really? It's completely your own fault you went in. Brook chuckled. As tripping down the stairs was yours. I guess we're even then, said Ichigo as he wandered over to take a seat and watch the fish as they glided effortlessly through the aquarium's clear water. You know, Ichigo, Brook said as he took a seat at the grand piano, when you first landed on this ship, I wasn't so sure about you. You're a Shinigami, a ghost, death personified. To tell you the truth, I found you really quite creepy. Quote. I think I can relate, Ichigo said vaguely as Brook began to play a merry tune. As the skeleton went about playing the upbeat tune as easily as breathing, okay, breathing is a bad example when it comes to Brook. Ichigo came to a realization. This whole experience really was going to do his head in. How troublesome. The wizard sighed, picking his way through the ever-familiar streets of Karakura town, making his way over to the ever-familiar shop to which he'd been summoned. What does Urahara want this time? Geez, doesn't he know there've been changes? Yeah, these past 100 years have been, chill and bother each other whenever, and all, but I'm a busy man again these days. Finally, Shinji Hiriko reached the proverbial structure of the Urahara Shouten, and didn't bother knocking to announce his entrance before entering. He was late after all, but they'd still be expecting him. It wasn't like he was about to catch anyone off guard. Waltzing through the front of the shop, he nodded in quick regard to Ururu, who was cleaning out some shelves in the corner, and Jinta, who was sitting about bothering some defenseless insect. He reached the back rooms, working his way down the hallway and veering off to the last room on the left. Pausing for a moment, he looked around at the gathered familiar faces. Beside the door he'd just entered stood Tessai, arms folded and facial featured unreadable as always. Around a low square table, 3 more figures sat on cushions. At center, directly across from Shinji, Urahara sat, his trademark striped hat casting shadow over his all-knowing gray eyes. To his right was Yoruichi, a tone of anxiety slightly tainting her otherwise laid-back composure. To his left was Isshin, arms folded and resting on the table before him and staring rather intently at the contents of his teacup. breathed Shinji as he gave the room's occupants another brief once-over, a feeling akin to recognition suddenly charging through his veins. A slot. Well, isn't this nostalgic? Sit down, Hiriko, Yoruichi's air of command ordered him. Shinji gulped and obediently sought occupation in a vacant spot around the table, before busily pouring himself a cup of tea. Once he was settled, he directed his attention to Urahara. "What's this about, Kazuki?" he asked uncertainly. The other three followed the wizard's example of looking on at the shopkeeper in anxious curiosity. "This isn't about what we think it is it?" Isshin questioned. Urahara gave a sigh and a nod. "It seems," he spoke, "that our actions 25 years ago may not have been as permanent as we'd hoped. Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Apologies for all those quotes. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See ya next time."